All right. Hello, women's health students. I think I've got my act together here. I almost forgot to record, but I just remembered it. Okay. Any questions about the exam coming up before we get started? All right, I'm seeing no questions. So what we're going to do today is finish the obesity lecture. And I believe we ended up here on this slide during the last class. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this J-shaped curve phenomena here in a minute. But I do want to talk about pregnancy complications that happen for individuals who are obese. OBGYNs regularly screen for gestational diabetes, which is diabetes. It's type 2 diabetes that starts during pregnancy. The gestational means during pregnancy. And so this is high blood sugar during pregnancy, which can be dangerous to mom, and it can be dangerous to baby, particularly in that these women tend to have very large babies. Average baby's about 7.5 pounds. These babies tend to come out like 9, 10, 11 pounds, oftentimes requiring a C-section for a baby that large. Obese women are also at risk for this condition called preeclampsia. This is also called toxemia. Some of you have heard that term. This is when women get abnormally high blood pressure during their pregnancy, and it's almost as if their body is reacting like almost like an autoimmune kind of response towards the baby. And preeclampsia can create seizures in mom, and it can kill mom during the pregnancy, during the birth process, or even after the baby is delivered. If we've got any Downton Abbey fans in here, there was a case in Downton Abbey where the mom had preeclampsia that was not diagnosed back in the day, and then she died after her baby was born. The C-section is oftentimes required, and there are certainly more risk factors to mom for C-section. It's like less risky for baby being able to get a baby out via C-section, but more kind of complications than a vaginal birth. And then the babies of these obese individuals have higher risk of spina bifida, which are the neural tube defects where the spinal cord doesn't totally close up around the back. More at risk for stillbirth, so full gestation baby that's born dead. More at risk for premature delivery, so before 40 weeks of gestation, and then like we've talked about, the large babies. Here is the J-shaped curve that I'm talking about when we look at body mass index in women and risk of death. And we see here 25 is considered to be overweight. 20 to 25 is considered to be normal weight. At 30, we start the cutoff for obesity, and at 35 is the cutoff for morbid obesity. But what I want you to pay attention to in this J is it actually looks like women who are below 20 in BMI have high mortality. You can kind of see it right here. Just like the mortality where we start getting into morbid obesity here. Some of this is due to eating disorders, but a lot of this has to do with what happens for individuals when they're very sick and they're terminal and they're moving towards the end of life. And you all have probably seen this in relatives. There tends to be a body wasting. The body wastes itself, and individuals oftentimes lose their appetite and they're not eating well. They're not moving around and keeping muscle strength, that type of thing. But I do want you to pay attention to this J-shaped curve, and I especially want you to pay attention to this interesting thing right here. Based on mortality, being overweight is the safest thing for preventing death when you look at the scientific literature, which kind of begs the question, we oftentimes think about being overweight as being this really bad thing. And if it is overweight on the way to morbid obesity, perhaps that is unhealthy, but a lot of individuals would be considered to be overweight here. And really, it kind of begs the question of why don't we call this the best weight? Okay. And I think about it, this makes a lot of sense in terms of evolution. And we're going to talk a little bit more about evolution a little bit later today. But doesn't it make sense? Our body has the potential to hold fat reserves and hold extra energy. And doesn't it make sense that having some of those reserves is a good thing? Questions here? Anybody? Okay. Okay, I want to talk about metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is it's been happening to people for, all of eternity, but it's a relatively new term in a healthcare setting. So a rather young term. And metabolic syndrome is when individuals have a very large waistline, usually 35 or above. Remember, we talked about that waist to hip ratio the other day. Individuals who have high triglycerides, blood fats, individuals who have low amounts of the HDL, the good cholesterol. There's usually high blood pressure, and there's usually high blood glucose, which is either pre-diabetes or diabetes. And the part of the reason why they've developed this term metabolic syndrome is because having metabolic syndrome is going to put people at all kinds of risk. So particularly risk for cardiovascular disease. So if you look down here, a person with metabolic syndrome has twice the risk of coronary heart disease and 5 times the risk for developing type 2 diabetes. It's estimated that about 27% of people have metabolic syndrome, we're more likely to see this in individuals with abdominal obesity, so that android shape that we talked about the other day. Individuals who tend to be inactive, there's a genetic risk to this, and certainly age is a risk factor here. One of the things I want you to pay attention to for metabolic syndrome is it gives doctors a diagnosis. It gives them a diagnosis. It also separates individuals who their body size would be obese, but if they don't have metabolic syndrome, then they're healthy. If they're obese and they have metabolic syndrome, they're in danger. Okay. Add to this, and this gives me a lot of sympathy when I'm working with individuals with large body sizes, is that once a person develops metabolic syndrome, it makes it so much easier for them to gain more weight. Okay. And so you'll hear individuals with metabolic syndrome saying, doctors are saying, you've got to lose weight, you're unhealthy. And you will oftentimes hear these individuals saying, I'm trying, I'm cutting way, way back on my food and my calories, I'm trying, and I keep gaining weight. And it's like, a lot of times doctors will think, well, you're just being lazy, you're not doing it right. But this really is a thing. Okay. So you've got this condition that can be associated with pre-existing obesity. But in this situation, it makes it easier to keep gaining weight. And that's gonna, this is sort of like a trajectory. Once a person develops metabolic syndrome, it's a trajectory towards more health concerns. Questions here? Okay. I found some interesting data. We know that when an individual gets COVID-19 infection, if they have obesity and if they have diabetes, they are much more at risk for severe symptoms and much more at risk for death. But this was interesting. I found this article recently that showed that of people who are severe enough in their infection that they have to be hospitalized, 14.4% of those individuals, assuming they live and they don't die of the infection, 14.4% of them leave with either type 1 or type 2 diabetes that they did not have before the infection and before the hospitalization. Okay. There's something about this infection that is causing both type 1 and type 2 diabetes in individuals. There's a lot of hypotheses as to what's going on a physiological level for these individuals, but there's more research that we need to do to understand this. So we were at an interesting time in history pre-pandemic where we were seeing diabetes, obesity at an all-time high prevalence in our culture, type 2 diabetes at an all-time high presence in our culture. And now we're likely going to see even more of this post-pandemic.
I have a question about this.
Yeah.
So generally, like, people who get the onset of like type 1 can't, get rid of it, and type 2 you can. So people, I know there's probably not a lot of like information on this, but people who get the type 2 post COVID, are they able to like come back from that and no longer have type 2 diabetes, or there's probably not a lot of information?
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, it's a very good question. We don't know. And you're right. Type 1 is when the pancreas fails to produce insulin. And so they have to supplement insulin. Type 2 is more of a lifestyle driven type of diabetes that can be associated with the obesity, but some people get type 2 diabetes without. It's really more of a function of sedentary lifestyle is when I think about type 2. So it is, in theory, type 2 is reversible. In this situation, we don't know. We don't know yet. Yeah. It's not like they're going into the hospital and they're all of a sudden kind of becoming obese. There's something else going on, The thing that kind of fascinates me is it's type 1 and type 2. It would actually make a little more sense to me if it was just one or the other. But the fact that it's both, that in some cases it is just failing the pancreas and the production of insulin. In other cases, there's just insulin resistance. Yeah. There is so much we don't know going on with the COVID virus. Okay, I want to talk about, there is a tremendous amount of controversy in this field, and I want to talk about kind of what most people in the United States think, including most healthcare workers, versus the other side of this. And what most people think, this tends to be the scientist medical model, the way the media likes to frame the issue of obesity. And that message that gets pushed out into the public is that overweight and obesity are both unhealthy. And then the second piece of that message is, if those things are unhealthy, then the cure, what we need to do, is to help people who are overweight or obese lose weight, therefore then they can get healthy. Okay. Have you all heard that? Have you heard that message? Okay, most of you have. Okay. The flip side of that in the controversy, and this gets represented, there are two organizations that are called Fat Acceptance Movement. And these, keep in mind, people in this philosophy, in this organization, they like the word fat. They think it is an accurate description of large bodies that have extra fat on them. Okay, so the word fat is not stigmatized in that regard. Okay. But they are accepting of it. This idea that people around the globe come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, personalities, and body sizes. Okay. And they have all throughout history. There have been fat people all throughout known human history. The other organization, there's a lot of overlap between the philosophies and how these people think. It's called Health at Every Size, or HAES. I am a member of HAES. I follow a lot of HAES stuff on my Facebook page. And I like it because I have treated people with eating disorders, and I have treated people with morbid obesity who have health issues. And the way I kind of think about it is, and I don't mean to demean this, but I kind of think about with eating disorders, a lot of times what I'm doing is trying to help them lighten up. Like, lighten up, enjoy your food kind of thing, and enjoy your life. With obesity, oftentimes we're kind of doing these interventions where it's like, tighten up, you've got to be more careful kind of thing. And I think about sort of trying to take these different populations and moving them somewhere in the middle, and somewhere in the middle is advocating for a healthy lifestyle. Okay. It's not necessarily, there are certainly some individuals with anorexia who absolutely need to gain weight. But it's really not about necessarily trying to help lose weight or trying to help gain weight. It's about helping these individuals develop a healthier lifestyle with good nutrition and with exercise and with stress management and positive relationships and all that kind of stuff. And letting their bodies, the idea there, get a healthy lifestyle and let your body be where it wants to be. Okay. And so the health at every size is let's just help people get healthier. Okay. So it really kind of fits, it resonates with my treatment philosophy is what I'm getting at. Now, these people over here saying, okay, this stuff is really unhealthy and it's dangerous. We've got to help people lose weight. These folks over here are kind of like, no, let the body be where the body is. Let's be accepting of fat, but let's try to help people be healthy. They would also say the data is quite complicated. The risks of overweight are overrated. I showed you that J-shaped curve a little while ago. It is not dangerous to be overweight, according to the BMI charts. And it's only the morbid obesity that's really unhealthy. But keep in mind, people don't get to those really high levels of obesity unless they get that metabolic syndrome. Okay, that's a driving force. So you've got, it's one of these things where it's kind of like, well, duh, like, okay, once you have illness, guess what? That predicts illness. What these folks over on this camp also say is that nothing has worked. We have been not very successful at helping people lose weight and keep it off. Okay. And we know from animal models with mice, and we know from human models where this has happened naturally to humans, yo-yo dieting, where people lose weight, they tend to regain more. And if they lose weight again, they tend to regain more. And so yo-yo dieting, which it's called, is a formula for longer term weight gain, and it's not healthy on the body. Okay. I have a cat, he's over there sleeping. He was starving when I found him. He had worms and he was starving, poor little guy. And we took care of all that. And then he got out for 2 weeks in the winter, and every now and then we'd see him chasing a bird, but he would not come inside and eat. So he has starved twice in his life. And he is quite plump, quite plump. And it's, the vet will say he's fat, and we're like, he's starved twice, his body has rebounded trying to protect him from a future starvation. Okay. Another thing that they talk about in this camp is the idea that fat is beautiful in other cultures. And even in the US, a lot of people find fat people to be very attractive and very beautiful and very lovely. And so it's a bit of a cultural phenomenon. So it's interesting what controversy these two camps are in. But when you look deep into the data, you actually find that if you could, again, health at every size, regardless of where one's body wishes to be, if they're engaging in good nutrition and healthy behavior, exercise, all that kind of stuff, that's really what predicts health, or that's really what can predict illness if people are not engaging in a healthy lifestyle. Questions or comments here? Okay. You can look more into health at every size. Another thing that a lot of individuals with the philosophy of health at every size, they're really oftentimes into intuitive eating. And we talked about that a little bit the other day, where intuitive eating is, if you don't do this already, learning how to listen to your body. Learning to listen to your hunger signals, learning to listen to what kind of food, again, there's privilege here, but what kind of food would really be satisfying to you at this point in time, and can you access that food? And then it would also have to do with, this is hard for those of you who grew up with Clean Plate Club. I grew up with Clean Plate Club. My mom, kids were dying. Kids were starving in China when I was growing up. Apparently they're starving all over the world, but they were starving in China. And, Clean Plate Club, clean your plate, don't waste your food kind of thing. The intuitive eaters would be like, look, stop eating when you're done eating, when you're full, when you're satisfied. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, I did a book review on this book, and it was enlightening and very enjoyable for me to do the book review. And this is Dr. Abigail Sagai. She is a sociology professor and a gender study professor. And her book, What's Wrong with Fat, she's really focuses a lot more on media framing. So just like we talked about it a minute ago, how most healthcare providers, how the media tends to routinely in our culture say that overweight and obesity is unhealthy and dangerous, and it is stigmatized. We've got all kinds of horrible labels that we put on individuals who are obese, that they're fat, they're lazy, they're gluttonous, that type of thing. And it's an interesting stigma, because even People of race tend not to hold discrimination and prejudice against other races, but individuals who are fat oftentimes hold this prejudice for other fat people. It's a really interesting kind of thing. It's so pervasive in our culture. And she goes into great detail in all of the science of demonstrating, which I found to be fascinating, that it's more the cultural prejudice and the stigma and the discrimination that does the most harm to fat people. It's not their body size that's doing the harm. It's how people treat them vis-a-vis their body size that creates the most harm. Okay. And being fat is especially discriminatory against women. You can be a fat man and admired for your other qualities, your intelligence, your work ethic, how much money you make, whatever. Okay. But if you are a fat woman, and this has been documented across all kinds of domains in life. Fat women get less education. Fat women get less pay. Fat women get promoted less when they are in the workforce. They get discriminated against from their healthcare providers. Like I told you, I'm on a Hays. I kind of lurk on a Hays Facebook page, and it is sad how often individuals are complaining about their healthcare providers. It's usually their physicians that they're complaining about, but sometimes they're even complaining about their counselors and their psychologists, and how those healthcare providers are stigmatizing them. And then it's really interesting. A lot of them will talk about how they've learned, like when they go into a doctor's office, they routinely weigh you because it's easy to do. And sometimes your medication doses are a function of your weight. But how often these individuals are going in and saying, I don't want to be weighed today. And oftentimes the nurses will be like, okay, yeah. But that's really triggering for some individuals to be weighed. For some of us, it's no big deal. But for many individuals, what I'm hearing about, that's really a traumatic thing. And then they also complain a lot about, like, let's say they're in there for strep throat, and then the doctor's like, you need to lose weight. And it's like, my strep throat has nothing to do with my weight. But they routinely will complain that that's what's going on for them. So in What's Wrong with Fat, she just does a beautiful scientific analysis of how harsh the stigma is in our culture and how harmful that is for individuals when the scientific data really is not necessarily supporting that. Because, like we said, and I'm going to go into this a little bit further, you could be fat and healthy. What I also want to present here, this is some of Swami's research. Swami has been an editor he's an editor in body image, and I've published some studies in body image, and he has edited some of my work. He's a tough cookie in, in how he wants his science nice and perfect. But in his work here, what we're just demonstrating is that these are men and what body size, heterosexual men who are attracted to women, what body size they find to be the most attractive. And this would be what we consider to be men thinking, oh, most men like a BMI of around 20, and they find that to be beautiful and they find that to be most attractive. But what Swami has studied are these men that are called fat admirers, okay? And the fat admirers really like women with a lot more meat and a lot more fat on their bones, okay? So even up here, that they peak at 35 as an example. Okay, I want to go back to Abigail Sagai, Dr. Sagai here. She talks about in her book that she went, and she says she has thin privilege, so she's not a large woman, but she went to a conference, a fat acceptance conference, and she said she was pregnant at the time, and she said when she got on the airplane, she was just feeling like really big and fat. And when she came back from the conference after hanging out with all of these large people, she was like, oh, this is like a mosquito bite on my abdomen, as opposed to how she felt initially. Another story that she tells in her book is that one afternoon, she had a break in the conference stuff and she went to the hotel pool. And at the hotel pool, whoops, let me take a sip here. At the hotel pool, there were these large women hanging out at the pool in their bathing suits. And there were these men that specifically had come to the hotel knowing there was a fat acceptance conference to pick up women. And she says one of the images that kind of just burned in her and just gave her some joy was there's this like normal sized man sitting on the side of the pool with his feet in the water. And on his lap is this very large woman, and they are flirting and probably about to start something once they go back to a hotel room. And she just talked about how she was kind of like, oh, some guys really, really dig these women kind of thing. So again, there's a bit here of, people like and are attracted to different kinds of things. Not everybody is most attracted to women that we would consider to be at a normal weight. Any questions here? Okay, we're going to talk about this. I think I've got this particular chapter, the chapter on body snarking. I've got it divided up into a couple of levels. So we'll talk about that later this semester. But I do want to keep talking about weight stigma because it's so pernicious in our culture. There's an article that's called If Fat Shaming Worked. Like if I fat shame you and that makes you feel bad and you go lose weight and get healthy because you've been shamed because of the prejudice and the stigma. And the article says if it worked, there would be no fat people, because the fat shaming is so pervasive and so pernicious in our culture that, if it really did, help people feel bad enough about themselves that they went and lost weight, then we would have no fat people. Add to that, this is some of Rebecca Pull's research. I've used some of her research in my work in the past. She has found that not only does fat shaming somebody not help them lose weight, she has found that the weight stigma actually predicts weight gain. So the more that people are fat shamed, it actually results in more weight gain than it results in weight loss. And a lot of that has to do with some of that yo-yo dieting. And some of that has to do with, we know very clearly, I see this in eating disorders all the time, food restriction is a predictor for a lot of individuals of binge eating. And that makes some sense because the body registers, I'm starving. Therefore, when food is available, if you've ever been starving or really, really thirsty, once you eat or once you drink, you overdo it, right? It makes some sense. The body's trying to establish homeostasis. What she's also found is that weight stigma or fat shaming triggers eating disorders in a lot of people. Okay? So it's a really awful thing that happens. And again, I feel like I've got white privilege and I feel like I have lean privilege. I have never been discriminated against because of my body size. But I feel very strongly how awful that must be for individuals who face it. But even scientifically, it's predicting more weight gain. It's predicting eating disorders. Women are 2 times more likely than men to be discriminated against because of their body size. And 40% of adults report that they have been discriminated against because of their weight. Oops, let me go back. That is not what I tried to do. And it's the weight stigma that is most linked to poor health. So again, it's not the body fat that's predicting poor health. The weight stigma and the perception of that is a cleaner predictor of poor health. And that's independent of their actual body size. Okay, so this really is harming individuals. One of the things that I've attempted to do, like when we've written like an inclusion statement in our department, talking about not only inclusion of people of a variety of races and sexual orientations and gender identity, but I always insert in there and body size, that we're not going to discriminate relative to body size amongst our students. Questions here? Those of you who had my health psych class, you've heard this stuff before, but I'm curious, if you haven't had that class, is this new? Is this new information for some of you? Okay. All right, when we talk about causes, of obesity, we have to put this into, I think, evolutionary context. Because across human evolution, it's only recently, remember in the nutrition lecture, we talked about it's only recently that we've got illness associated with overabundance. All throughout our ancestry and all throughout our evolution, the problem has been more a problem of starvation. That if you did not have enough food and you were starving, you would die. We know that starvation is associated with lack of fertility in women. That makes perfect evolutionary sense. That would be the worst possible time if you were facing a famine, to get pregnant and try to feed a fetus, try to nurse a fetus. So the problem has been one of starvation, not a problem of overabundance. That's a relatively new problem. And so doesn't it make sense that all across the globe, as people were evolving, that anytime you had caught a gene from your parents that helped you gain weight and store body fat, that gene was going to give you an advantage for life and give you an advantage to reproduce and pass that gene down into future generations? And then it makes perfect sense to me that if this was happening all over the globe in evolution, we would have multiple genes, not just simply one gene. Multiple genes would be kind of mutating and popping up and saving one community or a lineage of people, a different gene popping up in another community, that type of thing. And so we find that there are multiple genes, and this makes perfect sense to me. About 30 to 80% of one's body size is predicted by our genetics. And scientists have identified 97 loci, parts of a gene that predict BMI. And they've also isolated 49 of these genetic loci identified with waist to hip ratio. Okay. So there's a lot of genetic influence. In Plomin's research, nobody does this kind of research anymore. It's considered to be, and social services never does this anymore. But it used to be, if there were identical twins that were born and they were orphaned, they would sometimes separate them. And so they'd be adopted by different families. Nowadays, it's more, they try to keep not only identical twins absolutely together when they are orphaned and need to be adopted, but they even try to keep siblings that aren't twins necessarily together too. So there's not a lot of this going on, but this makes a point. He studied twins that were reared apart, and he found that, and then they found them as adults, they'd been raised in separate homes, that the correlation in their body size was 0.74. So if we square that, 7 times 7, 49, about 50% of their body size was associated with their genetics, and 50% of their body size was associated with their environment. Okay, just kind of illustrating how strongly the genetics are operating here. The other stuff, the other 50% would probably be things like if that child was raised in a family where everybody was large and everybody ate a lot of food, likely to gain weight, versus let's say they were born in, they were adopted in a family where everybody's running triathlons all the time. That might be a little bit different. Okay. There's a gene in mice, the OB gene, which is a gene that predicts mice, if they have plentiful food, from becoming obese. It's also a gene that predicts type 2 diabetes in mice. So we know we've got just one gene in mice that really predicts. But here's the way I kind of think about it from a genetic standpoint. For people in the United States, considering our culture and considering our lifestyle habits for the average person in the US, if you come into the US, in this world, in this culture, with the genetics for obesity, then you've been plopped into an environment that's going to foster the obesity. Okay. If you come into this world and let's say you're in a third world developing country and there's not enough food and everybody has to move a lot during the day for their work, then not 100% of those individuals are going to end up obese. Okay. So when I think about genotype, I think about genes in our culture tend to be actualized because of our habits. Any questions about that? Okay. I want to talk about the National Weight Registry. Many of the individuals who started this are up at Pittsburgh, and what they, as researchers, there are a couple of them up there, as researchers, they were trying to help people lose weight and keep it off. And the scientific data just kept showing we're actually pretty good at helping people lose weight. We're horrible at helping them keep it off. Okay. And so they were getting frustrated. And then they finally had the brilliant idea of why don't we study? It's kind of like studying smokers who quit and then learning from studying smokers who quit. How did they do it? And then applying to how did they do it to help people quit smoking? In this situation, they created this registry where individuals would sign into the study to be tracked over time if they had lost a significant amount of weight and were actually able to keep it off. Okay. And then they studied, what are you doing to keep it off? Because most people aren't able to do that. And what they found as one example is, first of all, one predictor is people are exercising on a regular basis. Okay. And so I just want to add that here because that's not on the slide. But one of the things that they found is they took these people who had lost a significant amount of weight and were like holding at a weight. And then they compared them to individuals who were at matchable weights. Does that make sense? So you got the 25 BMIs and the 26 BMIs and the 27 BMIs. They found a control group matched on their body size who had never been larger and who had never lost weight and kept it off. And what they found, this gives me a lot of sympathy. The people who had lost weight and kept it off were consuming minus 800 calories a day relative to their matched weight counterparts. So not all of you understand calories, which are technically kilocalories, but 800 calories a day is a lot less food than you eat now. So that's the way I think about it. Like I like my food. I would not want to have to cut out 800 calories a day. And keep in mind, the average woman is probably around 2,000 a day in maintaining body size. So 800 is a lot. So in order to keep their weight off, they have to be exercising on a regular basis and continuously food restricting. Okay. And it's almost like the way that they keep weight off is an eating disorder. Is one way of, or a subclinical eating disorder. Any questions there? I'm not going to talk about the biology stuff here. I'm going to move on because I'm going to be careful with our time. Okay. I do want to talk about, and this makes some sense at times when individuals develop eating disorders, at times for individuals is life feels very out of control. The one thing I can control is what I put in my mouth and what I eat or I don't eat. And food is very personal. It can be very personal and very meaningful to us. I mean, I don't know if you all have like the situation where here's what you want to eat at Christmas, or here's what you want to eat in the family at Thanksgiving, or here's what you eat on special occasions, that type of thing. But a lot of us kind of have that. And then a lot of people have, foods that they like to reach to for comfort, as an example. One of my favorite foods ever are king crab legs. And it's like king crab legs and butter and a Chardonnay like that is like the ultimate special food in my book. Okay. And so that's a kind of a special occasion type of thing, a way to celebrate that type of thing. Culturally, it's interesting. And we talked a little bit the other day about soul food and how important where a person grew up and the kind of foods that they ate, how that helped define them. And then we talked about at the beginning of the nutrition lecture, isn't it kind of interesting nowadays how individuals are even a part of their definition for themselves is if they're vegetarian or if they're vegan or if they follow. I have a cyclist friend who's just all about paleo, like that's her thing. And she likes to talk about the paleo. I'm just like, ugh. Anyways, maybe not for me, but for her. Socioeconomic status, we have a really interesting phenomenon happening in our culture where families that tend to be obese are likely to produce kids who are going to be obese, who are going to have obese kids, et cetera, that type of thing. But it bifurcates based on one's socioeconomic status. And SES is a function of our education level, and it's a function of our income. And if you think about how poorer people eat, as an example, poorer people rely a lot more on fast food. Whereas if you think about more well-to-do individuals, I just gave you an example of king crab legs. Not everybody's ever even tried king crab legs. That is a privilege. They are expensive, okay? But people with more income, or if they go out to eat to a restaurant, are more likely to go to fine dining. Now, there's a big difference in what happens in a fast food meal and what happens in a fine dining meal. Tell me some characteristics of the fast food. Somebody shout out some ideas here.
Processed.
It's going to be more processed as opposed to like Whole Foods. It's going to have more chemicals in it.
Less nutrients.
Less nutrients, but more
Salt.
Yep. Yes. And more
Calories.
Fat.
Yeah, more fat and more calories. Yeah. And one way of thinking about it, if you are a poor person, it's kind of like the soul food. You know, if you deep fry the chicken and you deep fry the okra and you know, whatever, you're going to add a lot more energy to it. So if you're poor and don't have a whole lot of money for food, it's no wonder fast food restaurants advertise on taste, and they kind of advertise more bang for your buck, right? You know, if you've got $10 to spend on a meal for your family, you might be able to go to a fast food restaurant and get everybody fed with $10. If you go to a fine dining restaurant, $10 might buy you an appetizer. Okay. And that appetizer may have 200 calories in it. It's not going to feed your whole family. Right. And so you see this really interesting thing kind of happen. And the data is so strong. We'll get into this in one of the book chapters later on the semester. But the closer fast food restaurants are to schools, public schools, the fatter the kids are in that school. The more distance schools are from fast food, the more likely those kids in that school tend to be leaner. Okay. And there are more fast food restaurants in poor neighborhoods than there are in well-to-do neighborhoods. There's more fine dining in the well-to-do neighborhoods. If that makes sense. Add to that, poorer people often, some of this has changed with the pandemic. It's going to be interesting to see how all this pans out over time. But poor people tend to cook less for themselves. They tend to buy fast food and buy out more often. Well-to-do individuals who have more time and more resources and can go and buy fruits and vegetables and that kind of thing are more likely to cook in their home. And when they cook in their home, they tend to cook healthier meals. And if they cook in their home, are going to teach their kids how to cook in their home. Those kids are going to grow into adults. And if they have kids, they're more likely to cook for them in their home. So you see, you've got this dramatic SES bifurcation happening. Does that make some sense? Okay. Add to this, 20% of people who are obese have binge eating disorder. And I was trained, and I've done this same kind of thing, that if you take somebody who's obese who has binge eating disorder, particularly if you haven't diagnosed it, and they want to lose weight, and you try to put them on some kind of food restriction plan, like a diet, that's going to create more binge eating. Okay. If I was trained, this makes sense logically to me, ask about these kinds of things. And if they have binge eating disorder, treat the binge eating disorder, which is treatable. There are lots of things that we can do to help people stop binge eating. And if you help them stop binge eating, a lot of these individuals naturally lose weight because they're not overfeeding in the binges. Does that make some sense? Yeah, treat the eating disorder. And then again, health at every size. Then let the body go where the body wants to go, as an example. This would be a Dr. Abigail Segre thing, and actually she talks about this in her book. There was research that was published. If we surround ourselves with obese individuals, we are more likely to gain weight and become obese than if we are surrounded with people who are lean and not obese. And that makes some sense. Like, I hang out with my cyclist friends, and they are fit men and women with thick thighs. Like that's my cycling friends, thick, strong thighs. That's who they are. Yeah. So we hang out with people kind of like ourselves, right? And if obesity runs in your family, you're going to be surrounded by people who are larger, that type of thing. But the way it hit the popular press, and this is one of the things where she critiqued it and was like, this is not what that study showed. It hit the popular press. Obesity is contagious. If you hang around obese individuals, it's contagious. You're going to get obese too. And what a awful stigmatizing message to push out in popular media. Okay. Let's just add more stigma. Like, not only do I have this prejudice against you because you're large, oh my gosh, you could harm me. Horrible, horrible messaging. Some other kind of factors associated with food. Some people are more sensitive to food cues, but the advertising industry knows we are quite sensitive to food cues. It's no wonder they advertise sugary cereals during cartoons that kids are watching. It's no wonder they advertise certain foods. They even will push out fast food ads in certain TV markets, more fine dining ads as an example, in TV shows that people of higher SES tend to watch. I find it funny during football games, not the Super Bowl, that's pretty special, but during football games, they advertise tasty food because there's more men watching football games. And then they're always advertising engagement rings. Like, here, men, go buy an engagement ring for your woman, that type of thing. Some individuals, and we know this, one of the treatment things that we do for eating disorders is more mindful eating, slowing down the eating, having people taste the food, really getting the reinforcement value out of the food, enjoying it, maybe socializing and talking with family members, but not eating while driving, not eating while watching TV, not eating while on the computer, all those other things that people mindlessly eat. They're doing it while they're paying attention to other things. And because of that, they're not really experiencing the reinforcing aspects of the food. Going back to the socioeconomic status, fast food. Not only can you get it fast, people eat it fast. You go to a fine dining restaurant, or like my daughter-in-law is French. She and her family, she grew up having 4-hour meals and her mom's an amazing cook. And she likes to do multiple stages of her meals and prolong it. It's kind of a cultural thing in France. But even in that situation, people are eating slow. They're enjoying an appetizer, hanging out. And maybe there's a first course, hanging out. Ending up eating less food and enjoying it more, but spreading it out over time. So we got a lot of cultural aspects happening, but in the United States, one of the biggest predictors is socioeconomic status. Questions or comments here? Okay, talked about health at every size, big fan. I'm a big fan of the lifestyle approach. And really, in that lifestyle approach, healthful eating and exercise is the key. Dr. Stephen Blair, he himself has had his own weight struggles in life. He's now down at USC. He's done some really interesting research that has found people who are fat, who exercise on a regular basis, so the exercising fat individuals, are healthier when you look at their body stuff, like their blood pressure and their cholesterol and their respiration rate. The more fit we are, the lower our heart rate is when we first wake up, as an example. So lower respiration, lower heart rate. The exercising fat are healthier than people who are thin and sedentary. So this is just really powerful data. The exercise is the key. Okay, regardless of body size. I found it fascinating. I haven't done a triathlon, a baby I don't do these big triathlons, but I've done some of the mini triathlons, but I hate swimming. So it's just like I have to make myself swim. I haven't done them in years, but I found it fascinating that most, even if they're these amateur mini triathlons, they will classify individuals. If you want to compete against people in your weight class, they classify the women, the larger women, as Athenas, which I think is wonderful. They're these, powerful goddesses kind of thing. But they call the men Clydesdales. And I just find that Clydesdales are beautiful horses, but they're really big horses. And so the men are these horses associated with beer, and the women are these goddesses, which I think is fantastic. Also, he has found in his research that mortality, so death rates, for people who are thin but not fit, so they're not exercising and they're not fit, is twice as high compared to those who are fat and fit. So we're getting a picture here. It's not about the body size. It's about whether or not they are fit, and the best predictor of fitness is exercising on a regular basis. Okay. So fitness reduces death rates regardless of weight. Again, health at every size. And we need to know that about 40% of people who'd be classified as obese according to BMI have normal cholesterol, normal blood pressure, they don't smoke, and they're actually physically fit. I love this picture of the large ballerina as an example. And I'm a fan of dance. I love watching dance shows, and I've loved it when I've seen stories of dancers with larger body sizes who buck the norm. They've had teachers say, "You'll never make it. You'll never be able to do this," but they keep going because they love it so much. And I just think that is absolutely wonderful. Everybody, if they like to dance, deserves to be able to dance and enjoy that. It should not at all be about one's body size. I especially love hip hop because hip hop is much more welcoming. I like the music, but it's much more welcoming of a variety of body sizes than, say, historically ballet. If any of you have watched Masterclass, though, I love Masterclass. I purchased this subscription. And I'm black, no, Copeland, Misty Copeland. She is a Black ballerina, has a slightly different body type than a lot of white ballerinas, as an example, but that woman is powerful. She is strong. And she does a really wonderful masterclass talking about her career. So it's obesity plus, what did I just do? Obesity plus sedentary lifestyle that is unhealthy. It is really the sedentary lifestyle that is key here in association with poor health, regardless of body size. So you could be thin and not fit. You could be larger and not fit. It's the not fit is the biggest predictor. And that is treatable, isn't it? We can get people, encouraging people to get moving and enjoying movement. Questions here? Okay, some real basic behavioral psychology here, that our food environment is going to predict what we eat. Like I said, if you go to a fast food restaurant, you're probably going to eat very differently than if you go to a sit down restaurant. And again, finer dining, that type of thing. In this particular study, what they found, well, let me give you another example real quickly. There's some really simple behavioral research called prompts. You set behavioral prompts, or you set stimuli in an environment. One example would be if you're trying to encourage your employees and you're in a building that has stairs and has an elevator, you're encouraging your employees to be more fit. Then if you, let's say you walk in the building and you see the elevator, if you simply put a sign there, stairs around the corner, more people will then go and take the stairs if they've been pointed to the stairs than individuals if the first thing they see is the elevator, they're going to take the elevator. Does that make some sense? So just putting that sign in the environment changes behavior because it prompts or it stimulates different behavior. In this study, what they did is they randomly assigned these fast food restaurants, and they would randomly in the restaurants either put up a sign that had the list of the foods in the menu with no nutritional information, like no calorie information. In another group of the restaurants they randomly assigned, they would put up information right where individuals are ordering, foods on the menu, and the calorie content of each of those foods. In another situation, they would randomly assign restaurants and put up a sign, menu, calorie content, and then how many miles you'd have to walk to burn off that calorie content. Okay. Now keep in mind that's more information, but if you're a walker or you're a runner or you're a cyclist, you're going to understand miles or kilometers if you're not from the US. Okay. If you are not a runner or a walker or a cyclist, you can't relate to miles. Okay. In the last condition, what they did is, and I don't have an example right here, but I'm going to talk about it, is they had the menu, the calorie information, and then they would tell people how many minutes you would have to walk briskly. People can relate to minutes. Okay. How many minutes you would have to walk briskly to burn off that food. And lo and behold, what they found is the more information they had available in a prompt in that restaurant, and the more relatable the information, like how many minutes of walking briskly versus how many miles of walking briskly, people chose meals with less calories in them. So the more information, the better, but the more information and the more relatable or user-friendly, the more likely people were to choose a more reasonably caloried meal. Does that make sense? Okay. When I was in Charleston, that is where I did my internship, every restaurant in Charleston, they were all in cahoots with one another because of the menu. But I found it was really helpful. You could go in and open up a menu that had lots of choices on it, but they would have little hearts next to heart healthy meals. And it just kind of helped me because I was trying to eat healthily. And, you know, I don't have heart disease or anything like that, but just to open the menu and only look at the meals that had the heart next to them and then decide, as opposed to a whole menu where you have to really kind of, you know, read and kind of cipher through, okay, was this really healthy? Is this not healthy? That type of thing. And it was just a really simple prompt, and, you know, and it worked because there were a lot of individuals sometimes there were individuals who had heart attacks or had a stroke, but then in a lot of situations, there were just people trying to make healthy choices. Okay. And it was just a nice, simple little prompt. Food labels. Our government likes to have very complicated labels that are hard to kind of sift through. Whereas if we have really simple labels, it's, you know, like drinking beverages with sugar can contribute to obesity, diabetes, and tooth decay. Real simple. Just put it out there as opposed to really complicated stuff where you have to be educated, really understand it. You have to spend a lot of time in a grocery store if you're reading those labels, trying to figure out what food you want to pick, that type of thing. And then nowadays, pandemic, like I went to the store this morning, like I'm not looking at any labels. I'm getting in and out, trying to avoid the people with the mask over their mouths and not over their nose, that kind of thing. All right. Now let's talk like big kind of policy and big kind of community types of interventions. I want you to know about the Rudd Center. I mentioned earlier some of Rebecca Pohl's research. She's a researcher up at Yale. So Rudd Center is housed up at Yale University. And they are an organization that relies on science, and then they do their own research, so they produce science also. But they are an advocacy organization against obesity stigma. So as an example, years ago, you all probably too young to remember this, but there have been lawsuits about discrimination against body size in the workforce, as long as body size does not affect your ability to do the work. And there've been lawsuits about flight attendants having required weight limits. And there have been lawsuits against larger people having to purchase 2 seats in an airplane. So just as an example, kind of putting that out there, this is an organization where, like, let's say they will be a watchdog for that kind of stuff, and they will get in there and present science. And a lot of times they will be a part of a legal team advocating for the rights of individuals with larger body sizes. So they're into science, they're into policy, they're into watchdogging these lawsuits and that type of thing, but really trying to reduce stigma. They're also involved at times in encouraging legal aspects of food advertising. So as an example, Dr. Kelly Brownell, there's a conference that I go to that I've seen him present. And he has had his own weight struggles, but he's up at Yale and he really advocates against food stigma. But as an example, he's gone against cereal companies that like to advertise sugared cereals in cartoons, as an example. Where then they're a little, and then they place them, we talked about this, they place them low in the grocery store. So the little kids are like, Mommy, I want this. Or they're watching their cartoon, ooh, that looks good. Mommy, buy me this kind of stuff. He has also spent a lot of time kind of talking about what we consider to be, he calls them default foods and default drinks. And defaults would be environmental. Like if you're in a cafeteria line, say in the public school system, and all there is to choose from are foods that are less healthy and higher in fat and higher in calories, then that's what the kids are going to eat. If you're in a food line in public school and there are healthier meals, a lot of the kids are going to choose the healthier meals if they've got that option, as an example. My older son was really into a lot of leadership in high school. And one of the things he tried to do in the local high school, and he wasn't successful, was they buy in the local high school, Hungry Howie's, the pizza company, right? They buy and they bring in pizza in the cafeteria for the students to eat. He tried to get Subway in so that individuals could have a healthier option by, picking certain sandwiches. He wasn't successful, but that would have been an example of that there are some kids that are eating pizza and pizza and pizza and pizza who would every now and then say, have a veggie sandwich or have a tuna fish sandwich or something like that. But if pizza is all that's available, then that's what you're going to eat. Okay. So the default foods are about that. Another thing that they've tried to do is get out of public schools sugar drink machines, as an example. As another example, just as from a legal standpoint, in California is much more progressive in terms of health policy than say we are here in the South. But the kids' meals are served with water or milk, like they don't serve like a Coca-Cola in the kids' meals, or like a Kool-Aid drink kind of thing in the meals. They're not permitted to do that. And again, the kids are going to drink the water or drink the milk. But if they were served a Coca-Cola, they're going to drink the Coca-Cola, as an example. So there's a lot that we can do. When I think about, I was trained for really difficult public health problems that ideally we learn how to do top-down policy. So this would be more community psych or more legal policies and laws, as well as bottom up. And the bottom up in this situation would be, say, working with somebody who's obese to try to help them create a healthier lifestyle. So it'd be bottom up would be the counseling, top down would be this kind of stuff. For treatment of obesity, I was trained to do what I'm just calling comprehensive assessment. And comprehensive assessment is where you do a whole timeline with the person's life and you talk about what happened in their life at what time in their life, particularly if there were times where there was dramatic weight gain. So one example would be when I was on my internship, one of the things that I saw in a lot of the women that I interviewed was dramatic weight gain during a pregnancy and having a baby. I saw a lot of weight gain from a lot of people, men and women, when they got serious in a partnership, like when they got married. But some of the women, like I would hear these things of like, well, I gained and kept an extra 50, an extra 100, an extra 150 pounds after a baby. And it's like, whoa. And post-pregnancy, that kind of weight gain is really hard to shed. On average, most women are encouraged to gain during a pregnancy about 30 pounds. And for most women, they shed most of that. Most women end up heavier after a pregnancy. That's just a normal kind of thing. So, gaining up to 150 pounds was very dramatic. I can tell you one of my friends had a C-section, and she's got a great sense of humor. When the doctor pulled the baby out, and once she knew the baby was okay, she was like, is he breathing? Is he this? Is he pinked up? And then her next question was, does he weigh 80 pounds? because that's how much weight she had gained. And no, he weighed about 8 pounds. So comprehensive assessment, screening for another thing that I've seen, and then we've talked about this on my research team, of people gaining a tremendous amount of weight after physical violence was directed at them or sexual assault was directed at them. I've seen some of that for individuals. And that at times, that's important information to know, because you might switch your focus of your treatment not to weight management at that point. You might switch your focus over into like PTSD treatment or trauma treatment for some of those individuals. Also, I was trained to screen for eating disorders, screen for history of food restriction, yo-yo dieting, screen for binge eating disorder, screening for depression, anything that could be affecting their physical and mental health. That's not just get in there and let me try to help you lose weight type of thing. So that comprehensive assessment gives a lot of information, and it's nice bonding, a nice way of bonding with people when they join weight management. Dealing with expectations. This is part of that comprehensive assessment. Many individuals, when I worked in weight management, like they would come in and say, okay, I weighed 130 when I got married when I was 25, and now they weigh 150. What's your goal weight? 130. As a therapist, you don't want to be pessimistic and go, well, that's not going to happen. But the reality of it is that's not going to happen, right? But when people have that big expectation, it sets them up for failure. If they're not, like, let's say they're losing gentle weight, like a pound a week, and it's going to take them 40 years to get to their goal weight. Screw this. I'm tired of restricting my food intake. Okay. So taking their expectations, and this is why I like taking expectations for weight loss and just moving into the lifestyle stuff, like how would you feel about letting me help you get more exercise? How would you feel about letting me help you shape the way that you shop and you prepare your food, the way you cook your food, the way you eat your food? And let's see where your body goes. But I'm pretty confident you're probably going to lose some weight. It's a tough shift to make for people. But again, if the only motivation is I hate my body and I want to lose weight, that is not going to set them up for success. It's kind of like the fat stigma doesn't predict weight loss. The fat stigma predicts weight gain. Okay. So this is a real tough shift that we have to do to help individuals. And then there's this thing called the 10% rule of thumb. And regardless of how big a person is, 10% for a 200 pounder would be 20 pounds. 10% for a 300 pounder would be 30 pounds of weight loss. But we know if we can get people to a 10% weight loss, particularly if they've got health problems, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high heart rate, whatever it might be, if we can help them with 10% weight loss, it has a dramatic impact on improving their health. Reason why is because oftentimes you have to make significant lifestyle change to get to a 10% weight loss. 10% is not easy. Okay. It's not just going to be happening if you have some lower calorie foods every now and then. It's going to take dramatic lifestyle change to create that. And so somewhere in there, the lifestyle change is predicting the improved health. The lifestyle change is predicting that weight loss. Okay. But again, 10% is very different than, say, that 150 pounder wanting to be back down to 130, right? That's likely not going to occur. The other issue that we have in this is, do we put people on diets or do we not put people on diets? I was trained, I was able to work in weight management, and this is more my philosophy. I much prefer helping individuals make better food choices, cooking differently, but not all this behavioral stuff, but not calling it a diet. Because diet mentality is, it's like short term, like I'm going to do this horribly punishing thing and I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to keep it off and life's going to be great kind of thing. That never really works for people. And so really focusing on lifestyle change is much more fruitful. The programs that are food provision, they do work. They work while people are on them. So this would be things like Jenny Craig, Nutrisystem, where you purchase the meals. You don't have to make any decisions other than which of these frozen meals do I want. And then they're pretty good nutrition, relatively low in calories, with the idea of if this is all I'm allowed to eat for lunch, this is what I eat for lunch, is going to be more successful in helping individuals lose weight than if I have to go prepare my lunch. We have to make those decisions, and oftentimes people are eating a little more than they want. So the problem with the food provision, it works when they're on it. It doesn't transition very well to back to like real world eating though. So, but these companies, financially, they do well. There must be a market for them. Some of the primary care guidelines that really works when you're in primary care and you're counseling people in lifestyle change and trying to help individuals lose weight. They have found that if they do 6 months worth of counseling, that amounts to about 14 sessions for individuals. On average, there's an 8% weight loss. So that's getting pretty close to that 10% rule. That's rather successful is what this is saying. And then they'll add, if they add a 1-year counseling session about maintenance, so that's more relapse prevention. And the goal when they're doing this kind of program is to get people exercising weekly. I was trained in weight management. I think this makes sense, is encouraging people to weigh only once a week if they weigh. Now, some people, it's dangerous for them weighing because it triggers eating disorder stuff and that kind of thing. But more compulsive weighing, like weighing daily, or weighing, I've worked with people that will weigh multiple times a day. That's more of an eating disorder and OCD kind of thing. Weekly weighing and then graphing it gives people an idea of a pattern over time. And then food recording, we used to do these little booklet diaries. Nowadays, you can do a lot of food recording on a smartphone. When I have worked with individuals when they're doing food recording, it's so that I can give them feedback on what could be helpful and healthier for them. So as an example, when I worked in Charleston and we looked at people's beverages in their food diaries, a lot of people were drinking sweet tea because we drink sweet tea in the South, right? And so encouraging them, could they start mixing and doing half sugar tea, half unsweetened? And can they wean themselves to a point where if they're drinking tea on a regular basis, they're drinking unsweetened tea, as an example. So you're shaping the food choices. Let's say they had a chicken sandwich and I'm asking, was this a fried battered chicken breast or was this a grilled chicken breast? And if it's a fried battered, can you try the grilled chicken sandwiches the next time you go to that restaurant and see what you think of it? So just gently kind of shaping those food choices over time to help them become healthier. In this particular program, they were usually kind of shooting for a deficit of 500 to 715 calories a day. But again, this works, but it's ongoing counseling, ongoing shaping their lifestyle change that really works for people. Medications, we have not seen any miracles over time. I realize we're getting close to the end of class. If y'all need to jump off and go elsewhere, feel free. This is recorded. I'll put it up. If you can hang in there with me, I'll just finish this out. No miracles over time. Amphetamines have been used, and back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of doctors were giving particularly women, speed prescriptions, amphetamine prescriptions for weight loss. It was actually quite successful at helping women lose weight because it tampers appetite and it speeds up metabolism. But in the meantime, being on speed is not healthy for the body, and it was very dangerous for a lot of people. Then we had these over-the-counter kinds of things, like Mahong and ephedra, that were sold as over-the-counter herbs. And in an unprecedented stance, the FDA usually only regulates prescription meds, and usually only regulates over-the-counter meds. FDA stepped in with these supplements because they were killing people, and the FDA had these supplements pulled off of the market because they were so harmful. So these are like herbal speed. There was a medication called Fen-Phen that also got pulled from the market by the FDA. It was a combination, antidepressant combination, amphetamine speed. It was also killing people. One of the former adjuncts in our department, he's no longer teaching for us, but his wife died on fen-phen. She was taking it for weight loss and died. There are some other medications that a lot of the research is more looking at preventing or controlling type 2 diabetes that also seem to result in some weight loss. Victoza, as an example, controls blood glucose. It works best in controlling the diabetes and weight loss if they're exercising also. The fat absorption blockers. When I was down at MUSC, again, many, many moons ago, and I had nothing to do with the research study, they were a site study for orlistat. And when you take these medications, they work in kind of two different ways. When you take these medications, they prevent fat from being digested in the body. So the calories from the fat that's consumed does not get released in the digestive system. The fat goes through the digestive system without being digested and absorbed. Does that make sense? So they work two different ways. One is if you are on these meds, if you consume a high fat diet, you are going to pay royally. And there's a side effect, and it literally is what it sounds like. It's called dumping syndrome. Your body goes, whoop, can't digest all this fat, boom, dump, big explosive diarrhea kind of thing. Okay. So when people are on these meds, it behooves them to be very careful about their fat consumption or they are going to pay. Okay. So then they eat less fat, right? And then the fat that they eat goes through their body undigested. When I was down on my internship, I can tell you from being in the weight management center and everybody using public bathrooms, people on these meds have to use the bathroom more frequently because stuff is going through their body undigested. But I can also tell you, here's the gross thing. You all know how fat floats. In the public bathrooms, there were oftentimes stalls with really grossness in them, and then that's when you want to go and pee in the, another stall kind of thing. The feces would be floating because it would contain fat and it wouldn't flush. So a lot of these individuals who are on these meds were using these bathrooms, and it was creating this, this unpleasant side effect for others who also had to use the bathrooms. Another medication down here that is more like an antidepressant is Belviq, and it kind of gives the body a little more serotonin, gives the body a little more peace and pleasure, so that individuals are not necessarily needing it from their food. It also helps kind of modulate their appetite. And they are successful in some mild weight loss, but again, much better if there's lifestyle behavior along with the meds. Behavior modification stuff would be a lot of the stuff that I've talked about today, decision making, doing things like adding your food to your plate, not having somebody serve you food because they might be serving you much more. We've had to do that even in my own relationship because my partner eats, because he's a big guy, eats a lot more food than I do. And when he serves me food, I'm like, oftentimes I'm like, whoa, it's not like I haven't eaten in a week. So we've learned over time, he serves his food, I serve my food, we get the right amount. But if he were to serve me what he thought would be for him, it's just way too much for me, that kind of thing. Doing things like, we know that mindfulness, like doing a mindfulness meditation or even prayer before eating, tends to slow down the eating. You all have heard this stuff, drinking fluids while eating, using smaller plates instead of big plates, chewing food, making sure that you're taking smaller bites and chewing it, listening to your body, like listening to, okay, I was really hungry and I started eating, I think I'm full now. Even if there's still food on the plate, learning how to be able to either serve less if that's too much, so you're not wasting, that type of thing. All of this kind of stuff. And then there's even a thing called urge surfing. This has been used in addictions for years, but it's when, let's say it's a weird time of day, like 2 o'clock, and you're like, oh man, I'm really hungry, I want to go eat. The urge surfing would be like, let me give this 10 minutes and see if I'm still hungry in 10 minutes. Because for a lot of folks, it's like, okay, 10 minutes from now, nah, I can wait until dinner time kind of thing. And then we do a lot of motivational interviewing, just kind of, trying to keep people thinking about all these different lifestyle behavior changes that can help them eat more healthfully, help them eat less if they're trying to lose weight. But again, it's not these dramatic diet kinds of things. It's a lot of common sense kind of thing. Some of the companies, I've already kind of mentioned Jenny Craig. They do the pre-packaged meals where you get frozen meals sent to your home. They're expensive, $750 a month. That's a lot. But then keep in mind, you're not if you're single and this is what you're eating, you're not grocery shopping and buying food because you're only eating what they deliver to you. But that's still expensive. But it works. It works. You get about between 70. Remember the magic number is 10%. 10.9% of weight loss in a year when people are following Jenny Craig. Weight Watchers recently turned to WW. They're not calling themselves Weight Watchers anymore. And the reason for that is they finally kind of woke to the stigma aspect of it. And they do a point system, which is kind of brilliant. So instead of they used to have their clients, if you paid to go to Weight Watchers, count calories. But calorie counting is kind of complex. Now it's a little bit easier to like look stuff up online or look stuff up from a calorie counting menu. In the old days, they'd have to flip through these books and find stuff. And now they've just reduced it to a point system. Again, going back to the decision-making stuff we talked about, it's much easier for these clients to count X amount of points a day than to count calories every day. And then the number of points that individuals are given is based on their gender and based on their body size. So let's say I went to Weight Watchers and I said, I'd like to lose 10 pounds. Then they would calculate for me how many points in my food I should be eating every day and not exceeding those points if I want to move towards my 10-pound weight loss, that kind of thing. And then it's much easier. And then a lot of the food labels will even have the points on them, but it's much easier than the counting calories. It's about $40 a month. And Weight Watchers, and I don't know if they're doing it virtually now or not, but in the old days, you would actually go into like a group meeting, almost like an AA meeting, but it'd be a Weight Watchers meeting. Get weighed in, people would share and help one another, and then they would be given advice on what to do, how to tweak their lifestyle thing, how to maybe it's time for them to lower the number of points that they are eating every day, that kind of thing. It works pretty well in reviews of this. And then people with morbid obesity are more likely, if they've got lots of medical conditions, they're more likely to be encouraged to have medical supervision. If they're trying to lose weight, they might be put on a very low calorie diet, the VLCDs, which are oftentimes liquid diets. And they've gotten better with the liquid stuff where nowadays they've got really good nutrition. They had in the past, people had all kinds of problems with constipation because they weren't getting any fiber. Now the VLCDs are not only packed with nutrition, very low calorie, packed with fiber. So it's giving people kind of what they need. Or surgery. So let's talk about the surgeries. Let's talk about childhood obesity pretty quickly, and then I'll talk about surgeries, and then we'll call it a day. Childhood obesity, we've seen this in research studies that I've done with Dr. Amy Galloway in our department. And then we've seen this in other people's research. About a third of parents who have overweight children think their kid is the right weight. So a lot of parents aren't necessarily tuned in when their kids are gaining weight, getting overweight. Overweight, obese kids are a lot more likely to be obese adults, and that's no surprise. But this makes sense to me that if you're if you and say partner are larger and you have larger kids, well, they look like me. They're okay, right? So sometimes parents aren't tuned in to what could be a progressing problem. We get issues of should the school system send home feedback? And this is controversial because this is usually health teachers or PE teachers, if they're weighing kids and they're sending home feedback of you need to go talk to your pediatrician, your child is overweight or your child is obese, that backfires for a lot of kids because it increases stigma, and it can backfire and trigger an eating disorder for some kids. So we got these delicate kinds of issues going on here. So we've got that going on. And so it kind of begs the question, what's the role of the school system? What's the role of the pediatrician? What's the role of the parents? And how to do this in a way that's not harming kids. I can tell you that there is some research where if you get the whole family involved in lifestyle change, that's going to be the most effective in helping kids not become obese or treating childhood obesity, or helping those kids as well as the parents become healthier. If the whole family participates in the exercise, in the changing in the way that they shop, cook, eat fast food, that kind of stuff. Okay. Surgery. Obviously, as a health psychologist, I am usually all about the behavior, all about the lifestyle change versus looking at medications or looking at surgeries. But interestingly, this is one of the places where the surgeries tend to be the most successful. And so again, if individuals are interested in bariatric surgery, which is where they surgically shrink the stomach size, which results in weight loss because you feel full very, very quickly if your stomach has been shrunk. I did bariatric assessments on my internship. We look at people's lifestyle. We look at the way that they tend to eat. We know that major depression, you're not supposed to give them the surgery until the depression is treated. Mild depression actually seems like it gets better when people have the surgery. We screen for binge eating disorder because if you get your stomach surgically shrunk and you're a binge eater and you binge, you could blow. You could blow from the inside out, and that's going to result in death. So we treat the binge eating before people are allowed to have surgery. We screen for IQ. People need to understand the dramatic lifestyle change and be capable of the dramatic lifestyle change if they're given the surgery. And the dramatic lifestyle change is eating very small portions, getting liquid vitamins and minerals, eating without drinking. Like I can't picture. I can't imagine. I drink lots of fluids, but I can't imagine eating and not lubricating food with beverage. But oftentimes they have to eat without drinking fluids to just make sure they're getting good nutrition in very, very small amounts. And so lower IQ individuals are not going to be capable of that. So they're usually denied surgery. Making sure individuals have the social support that they need to change this dramatic lifestyle change post-surgery. And so this is one of the places where the GI docs regularly rely on psychologists to do this screening and for the psychologists to make decisions about whether or not the person's going to get this surgery or not. Okay. The GI docs do not want to operate on somebody who's going to have a bad outcome. They don't want to operate on somebody who's a binge eater, as an example, and they give them the surgery, they binge eat and they die. And then the family sues the doctor, that kind of thing. We know that for people who approach these surgeries and ask for it, there's a lot of people with mood disorders, a lot who have eating disorders, a lot of anxiety problems, and a lot of substance abuse. Okay, I'm not gonna tell that story. I'll keep moving along. It's pretty successful, 20 to 35% weight loss in a year. Remember, our magical number with the behavioral stuff was 10%. And even you saw with like the primary care, the Jenny Craig, the Weight Watchers, we rarely hit that 10%. So this is pretty significant, okay? It's much more successful when these individuals after the surgery are weighing on a regular basis, learning how to stop eating as soon as they're full, really listening to that smaller stomach, because some individuals will stretch that stomach back out, but the more that they're tuning in and they're paying attention to that, making sure they're eating discrete meals instead of grazing throughout the day, because they can sort of trick the small stomach. If they're eating teeny amounts but grazing all day long, they're going to end up consuming more calories than if they're eating the 3 meals, maybe with some snacks every day. When they're doing this stuff on top of the surgery, they lose 14% more. So the lifestyle change after the surgery is very important. And then the data over time would be people with BMIs, very large BMIs, maintaining weight loss over 10 years. Not as successful for people in this type of BMI group. And it's rare for individuals to die after these surgeries. People do die. And when they do die, they die because they binge eat, or they die because they get progressively malnourished. And adverse events aren't that common, but only about 1% of people with this really high BMI are accessing the surgeries. They don't do this anymore. My mom had a friend when I was a little girl, it scared the bejeebies out of me, this woman. But they used to, like when you break your jaw and they wire your jaw shut where you have to get liquid through a straw, they used to actually wire jaws shut for individuals to keep them from eating too much and helping them lose weight. The thing that grossed me out, my mom's friend and coworker when I was little, is I remember meeting this woman and talking to her, and she had to talk like this because she couldn't move her teeth because she had her jaw wired. And then I remember my mom telling me that she had to carry pliers with her everywhere she went in case she threw up. She'd have to cut herself loose if she threw up. So you don't want to throw up and not be able to, because then it'll go back and you'll asphyxiate and die. So it was like, okay, surely. I remember as a little girl, like, okay, first of all, she talks really weird. And then the whole pliers thing grossed me to no end. I'm like, oh my gosh, throwing up is bad enough. Can you imagine throwing up and having to cut your jaw loose so you could, throw up wherever you were? I think that's when I wanted to become a health psychologist, or at the time I wanted to become a physician, thinking there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way than what's going on with this stuff. All right. Okay. I'm going to stop the share. It's been a long lecture. Y'all been troopers hanging in there. Anybody have any questions about what we covered today, or anybody have any questions about the exam?
When will it open?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's open right now. Yeah, it should be open. Actually, I think I opened it 15 minutes ago, or I told it to. I'll double check after we get done here, make sure. Other questions about the exam? Anybody? All right, well, show me what you know. Get in there and jam on it. Okay, I'll see y'all. Take care. Bye.